So a huge welcome to everyone who's joining us today. This is the very first webinar in a brand new series that we're running called Level Up. So this is the first one kicking off today. And it's completely crackers to think that we're almost 2 years now into the fabric journey. It is absolutely flown over. But for those who don't know me or are new to our webinars, I'm Lisa, founder of Fabric Academy and marketing and comms agency Unwritten. And we built Fabric with the sole purpose to help empower marketers to thrive and to provide you guys value, knowledge, support, training, and to really help see our community progress in their careers and become the very best marketers that they can be and do a whole host of amazing things along the way. And so this brand new series of webinars is just that, essentially. So we're here to help you guys level up in any way we possibly can. And throughout this series, we're going to be giving you as much advice, support, knowledge, tips, techniques, telling you stories, anything that we think will help you guys advance and in some cases get your very first foot on the ladder, so to speak. And so if you're an ambitious marketer and you're looking to take your first steps into marketing or the next big step into the next role, then this series is designed just for you guys. And today's guest is here to talk to us all about that very thing, breaking into the industry after uni and securing that kind of all-important first role in marketing or any other area. So just before we get started and before I introduce the lovely Sophie, who you can see is with us today, please do say a quick hi in the chat. Let us know who you are. Let us know where you're from. If you're a grad, let us know what you're studying, which university you're at. We'd love to say a quick hi to you. And don't forget to switch your chat feature to all panelists and attendees, just so we can all see you when we know you're there. So, without too much further ado, today we have got a super exciting guest who knows everything there is to know about getting career ready. No pressure, Sophie. Sophie's a former graduate recruiter at John Lewis and has since worked with some amazing employers like M&S, Expedia, A&X, and has delivered huge recruitment campaigns. She has written a best-selling book, which is super amazing.
Actually, two, Lisa.
Two now. Well, I was going to come on to the second, but From Learner to Earner was the first, right? And that gives Recruitment Insider's perspective in terms of what it takes to achieve graduate success. She's also an award-winning businesswoman and a very proud mum, a little gal. And most recently, a newly released second book, which is called The Ambition Accelerator, is a working woman's guide to powering up professional success. So today she's going to share everything we possibly can with you, including all of her tips and advice on breaking into the industry and being successful in your chosen career. So Sophie and I are going to chat for the next 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to open the floor to you guys where you can ask all of the questions you'd like to ask to Sophie. Keep them coming throughout the webinar, stick them in the Q&A, and obviously we'll start to facilitate them once we've finished our first session. So sorry to go on a little bit there, but Sophie, hello, huge welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. It's always good to get involved in these sorts of things.
Good. So this has always been a really hot topic, right? Breaking into the industry, grad recruitment process, finding that first role after you've left uni, and the job market seems super tough. It always has been, but at the moment particularly. So I'm dying to get all of your thoughts and advice on this today. But just before we get started on that, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, before we jump into the questions?
Sure. I mean, I think you've given me a good intro there in terms of sort of what I've been up to. But I guess, if I was to think back to when I was a student, when I was at uni, when I was graduating, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Well, actually, I thought that I wanted to be a buyer, actually, a fashion buyer, and then realised you had to live and work in London, and that wasn't for me at that point, although it was ironic because I did end up down there a few years into my career. So I applied for the local graduate scheme for John Lewis back up in Newcastle so that I could move back home, and got that role, and that gave me a really good grounding in terms of different functions within a retailer. Found it really interesting. Managed virtually every department in the Newcastle store over the time that I was on the programme, which was great fun. Some departments were more interesting than others. Beauty was a favourite. Audio and TV was fun. Haberdashery less so. But yeah, great experience, and really developed my management skills, and then fell into HR, as I think people often do. I think marketing is probably more of a destination career where mostly people know that they want to go into that, but HR less so. So kind of fell into that, got an opportunity to go on this secondment down to London, and then never came back. Spent sort of 7-8 years down there working in a variety of roles, fell into the head of graduate recruitment job, absolutely fell in love with it, loved the industry, and then set up what is now SRS back in 2013, moved back to the Northeast. And yeah, we're working now with employers and with universities, all within the graduate recruitment and employability space. So the stuff we do with employers is to design their assessment processes and materials and help them to find their graduates. And then on the uni side, which for me is the fun side, if I'm being honest, we get to work with lots of students and help prepare them to get through the recruitment process. And I absolutely love that side of it. It's so much fun. It's really rewarding. We get to see students who are a bit anxious or nervous and work with them to make sure that they've got the best chance of securing a job.
Which is so amazing. You know, it's such an amazing, I can imagine that, you know, how much you get out of that process. And I guess we've got a lot of grads on this webinar today. So I guess we're going to try and extract some of what you do in that process, Sophie, today, to try and give everybody on this webinar as much help and support as possible. So just starting off here, we know that breaking into the industry at any time is tough, but right now, tougher than ever maybe. And especially if we're talking about something really particularly competitive like marketing or other sectors that are really, you know, there's so many candidates and so few jobs. What are the top qualities you look for in a graduate candidate?
So I guess, you know, you've got a broad set of soft skills that you would look for in a graduate for any discipline, and then when you're looking at specific functions like marketing, there's some sort of nuances that you would be particularly looking for. So I think the key thing to remember with a graduate job is that the employer is mainly hiring on your enthusiasm, your personality, your can-do attitude, all of those things, rather than your experience. You know, if you are a traditional graduate, you know, you've gone to uni at sort of the traditional time at 18 and you graduated at 21, you're only going to have so much experience. So, you know, you can't kind of beat yourself up on expecting to have loads of experience. So it's looking for, you know, transferable skills. I'm sure we'll come on to that, but it's all about attitude. And that's what most employers will be looking for from graduate recruits. But I think if you were to pull off some skills that you'd be looking at specific to marketing, I would be looking for great communication skills, because I think that's going to be really important for marketing. I'd be looking for creativity. So marketing, you know, there's a lot of people that are in there, and you do need to be a bit different and just show a bit of a spark for thinking a bit more creatively, for problem solving, etc. And I think within that, probably an element of commercial awareness for whatever industry it is that you're going into. And then planning and organisation, I think, is probably really key for a marketing role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being an employer who employs graduates, you know, that's absolutely bang on, you know, especially in terms of those, you know, personable skills, enthusiasm, determination, ambition, you know, that can-do attitude really does shine through. Obviously, there's, you know, we're talking to recent grads here, so this is really pertinent. And I guess one of the things that we get asked in terms of maximizing your chances for success, what are the best ways to get noticed? You know, in a market particularly that's very busy, how do people stand out?
Well, I mean, you see all sorts of wacky things, especially for jobs like marketing, and I think kind of seen sometimes it can be a bit cheesy, I think. But I think when you're going to start applying for roles, I think there's quite a bit of prep work that you can do before that. It's not a case of just going, right, I'm ready, let's go, I've got my degree, I'm off. I think you need to be thinking ideally a lot earlier on. So, you know, if you're a first year or a second year, think about what can you get involved in now that is going to stand you in good stead at the point where you are actively looking for a graduate role. So can you do an internship? Can you do some work experience? Can you get some of those things under your belt? If you're finding it hard to get one specifically in marketing, is there something else you can do that's got those transferable skills? And then it's having your toolkit ready for applying for jobs. So, is your CV up to date? Is it in its best shape? Does it look attractive to a prospective employer? What are your social media channels like? And again, it's choosing which platforms to be on that your audience, your future employers are going to be on. So LinkedIn, is still a huge tool for all professionals, including marketing. But actually, and you'll probably be able to answer this better than me, but is it something like Instagram that might be more more relevant? So it's thinking about which platforms you need to be on, building a presence, doing a bit of a social media audit. So if your profiles are open, do you want an employer to see what's on there? I always find it really weird when employers spend time looking at sort of private profiles. So LinkedIn, get it, because it's a bit like a CV. But I've spoken to recruiters who have looked at a candidate's Facebook page before and then sort of brought things up in an interview. And I kind of think that they must have a lot of time on their hands to be able to do that. But also, yeah, just be careful with those settings. So if you've got stuff that you wouldn't want an employer to see, put it onto private or think about removing it. So there's a few things there that you can do just to make sure that you're ready to rock. And then it's a case of working out, who do you want to apply to? What are the roles that you want to go for? And trying to keep those pretty narrow. So none of this scattergun approach, just go for as many as you can, because that won't work. You will just dilute the quality of the applications that you're putting in. So before you get to that point, be really clear on who it is that you want to apply to. And it could be that you're signing up for alerts, job alerts from particular companies. You could sign up to jobs boards. There's a load of jobs boards. So some of the more popular ones, things like graduatejobs.com, GradTouch, Target Jobs, Prospects, etc. You can sign up for marketing alerts. So, do all of those things. And then when you're ready to start applying for them, just be selective and put high quality applications in.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think particularly on the socials, because I think when people in the more personal channels like Instagram and Facebook, you don't think twice about posting your personal content on there, or a strong opinion on something, or photos of you and family on holiday. But it's it is really true about which is private. What do you want an employer to see? And it's a strange, I guess, thought process to go through, but certainly if you're in the process of applying for lots of different roles, there will be a handful of employers out there who do check your socials out to see, what you're like as a person, to get a bit of an insight into how you talk, how you behave. And so, yeah, I think just having a little bit of a guard on some of that personal stuff that you wouldn't want out there in the public domain is great advice. Do you find CVs are still being used by employers, Sophie? Are they still as relevant?
Yep, so they are. They are still being used, but I think it depends who you're applying to. So for the bigger companies, you're likely to still be asked for a CV. For the smaller ones, you probably definitely will, because they'll have a shorter application process. So if you look at the possible application processes you're likely to see, for a smaller employer, it's probably send us your CV and a covering email. And then they'll probably shortlist and invite to interview, and it might be that they do a task as part of the interview. And then at the other end of the scale, if you're applying to really big organisations, you could have maybe 5 or 6 processes where you're doing things like, you might have to do online tests, which are brutal and no one enjoys those. So definitely practice those if you're likely to come across those. Application form questions, where you've got to submit answers of sort of 200-300 words for a set of questions. You'd probably be asked to put your CV in at that stage as well. Then you might have to go through a telephone or a video interview, then an assessment centre, and maybe a final interview as well. So it can be a really long, detailed process, and you've got to kind of get through each of those hurdles to be invited through to the next stage.
Yeah, it's tough going, isn't it? And I guess knowing that a CV is still as important, how do people make sure they get the best from their CV or stand out? And should a CV be one size fits all, or should people be adapting their CV dependent on the role that they're going for?
So I personally prefer a more traditional CV, and I think that It might be playing it safe a bit, but at least you know that they're going to be able to open it if it's in a normal package. So I would recommend that you do it in Word, but save it as a PDF when you're ready to send it to the employer so that they can open it and they can see what you can see. Sometimes I've seen CVs in really weird packages where I've not been able to open them because it's not been compatible with my my laptop or desktop or whatever. So that's a bit frustrating. I've seen CVs that have got loads of colour in them that are laid out in really funky ways, but for me, they waste space. They're not using the space in the right way. I've seen CVs with photos on. You do get that. That is quite acceptable internationally, but in the UK, it's not. And I would advise not to put a photo on because a lot of employers in the UK are very keen to do a bit of a blind recruitment process so that they don't know some of those personal characteristics of the candidates so that they can, you know, hopefully move through the process in an unbiased as possible way. So don't waste the space on that. Don't bother with the different colours. Don't bother trying to jazz it up. 2 pages with quality information in there. So, you know, something like a nice sort of, well, I would just put the contact details in the header, so you're not using very much space. 3-4 lines personal profile, into employment if you've got some meaty stuff. If you haven't, put education first, but otherwise employment, then education. Then you might want to, if you've got anything, you know, any awards or any you know, anything special that you've done, any particular skills, you could put those in. And then I think it's nice to include interests because that adds a bit of personality. And then you don't need to add, like, list your references on the CV. You can just say they're available on request, and then that only takes up a line. So 2 pages, fairly traditional format, but it's all about the quality of the content and making sure that everything that's there adds value.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, we're starting to see, I don't know if you're seeing the same, but really wacky applications. It's a traditional CV, but some sort of really creative, sometimes off the scale approach to getting in front of an employer. You know, we've seen branded cakes with the business owner's face on. We've seen merch that's been sent. Is it worth looking into the business and what you think they're looking for in terms of standing out, or is it a good idea just to simply play it safe, or does it depend on industry?
Oh, I do think it depends on the industry, and I think in something like marketing, you can afford to be a bit more creative to stand out. It depends how it's done. I mean, a friend of mine was head of graduate recruitment at M&S, and she told me about a candidate that they had, and it was for a marketing job, and they'd done like a shoebox application, and she said it was a really good idea, but they'd done it using a Primark shoebox for Marks and Spencers, and so it kind of just like the concept and the idea and the creativity was there, but you know, M&S obviously regard themselves as a bit of a you know, cut above the likes of Primark, so it kind of fell a bit flat on its face, and it was a bit cringe. So I don't know, because if you go in for a big company, they've got a set process and they kind of have to follow that application process because they need to treat all the candidates the same. It would be unusual that they would fast track someone through to the end of the process, because then they could be, you know, they could be challenged by other candidates around, well, you haven't judged us in the same way, you haven't assessed us in the same way. So I think it's probably better to play it safer with one of the bigger ones, and then maybe, you know, with some of the quirky ones. But you know, that's where your research comes in, because you'll know what kind of a brand it is where you can do something that's a bit more off the wall. But it also depends on you being that kind of creative person where you feel like you can come up with something that's really good and cool and is going to hit the mark. But for those bigger ones, you know, you'd struggle to even get things like that in front of them. So, you know, maybe just sort of play the game a bit and get a bit further along, because if you get into the assessment centre stage, for example, with a big employer, they might ask you to do a pitch or a presentation or something, and that's probably the point where I think that could kind of work a lot better.
I think the time and effort and sometimes the cost that must go into that very first process, especially if you're applying to lots, yeah, must be very kind of time consuming. But okay, just going back to something that you said a little bit earlier around kind of keeping away from that scattergun approach and really homing in on the roles that you think are most suited to. What's your advice around finding that right role if you're not entirely sure what you want to do? You mentioned earlier that, you know, when you graduated, you weren't sure what you wanted to do. How do you focus on that? How do you hone down?
I think for graduate roles, I would be saying, don't think that you have to look for a job based on the degree that you've done, because any degree has transferable skills that will be relevant to other areas. So I would be spending time thinking about what industry you want to go into and being quite open-minded about that. And also think about the kinds of companies that interest you. And I would go and do lots of research into those things. You know, if you're really struggling and you just haven't got a clue what it is that you want to do, you know, you can make use of services like the career service that you would have at university. Even if you've graduated, there'll be, you know, you get sort of 2 or 3 years where you can still use that service. So they might be able to help in terms of that. But it's, you know, reflecting on what your strengths are and where, you know, where they might fit. Or maybe it's applying for a graduate scheme that's got a rotational program where you can go and do different stints and different functions to work out what it is that you want to do. So the key thing is that it's got to be a role that you can get excited about, because if it's something that you're just doing because your parents have said it's a good option, or your mate works there and they think it's good, or you just, you know, some people pick up the Times Top 100 book and just apply for, you know, the top 20 companies or whatever, back to that scattergun thing. How are you going to be able to sit in front of an employer if you get to that stage, which you probably won't if you've not put a good quality application in, and show that enthusiasm and excitement for the job and for the company? Because it's got to be both. Like, it's got to be both. So if you can't articulate that and get that across, you're never going to get the job. So you need to spend that time up front working out who you can get excited about. And that's going to be limited. You're not going to be able to get excited about 40 or 50 companies. It's going to be a small number. So it needs to be genuine. And the people that do less but better sort of quality applications are the ones that always get through and get all the offers.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, because we've actually just employed somebody at Unwritten who has been on a grad scheme with Adidas for the last 4 years.
Oh, cool.
And she went in without really knowing what she wanted to do, and has had the chance over that 4-year period to almost try every different element of marketing you could possibly imagine. And she's now coming out of that business going, right, this is what I love, this is what I want to go into my next role. You know, yeah, I think often, you know, you don't always know, but maybe it's about choosing the company and where it's got a vast range of options to be able to move around a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And you don't have to have it all figured out. You know, I don't imagine, you know, either of us are doing what we thought we would do. I didn't even know my job existed until sort of 10 years ago. So, you know, you don't have to have it all figured out. You probably don't want to tell an employer at an interview that you're just kind of having a go and working it out while you're working for them. So you want to be enthusiastic about them. But, you know, once you've committed to accepting a job, you don't have to stay there forever. You probably do want to stay in your first job for a couple of years just to get the most from the experience. But it's not it doesn't have to be a long-term thing unless you want it to be. So, you know, to take what you can from that first job, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so talking a little bit about rejection now, because we've all been knocked back a million times before in the past, but it can be pretty devastating, obviously, when you've put a lot of energy into the application process, or you found a company or a role that you really, really want, and, you know, you don't get it. What advice can you give to people who, you know, are getting that knockback, they've been successful, or maybe getting multiple knockbacks one after the other? How do you stay super resilient there?
Oh, great question. I mean, you know, being rejected in job hunting is, you know, it's par for the course. It happens to all of us at some point, even when we're super experienced and we think that we tick all the boxes for some things. You know, sometimes it's just not meant to be, and there's someone that's that bit better or whatever. So I think, first of all, it probably goes back to the original point about only applying for things that you're excited about and you can show that enthusiasm for, because that is just key to everything. And that would be the one thing I would want to sort of pass on from all of this. But then, you know, once you're kind of moving through the process and you are being unsuccessful, and, you know, we call graduate recruitment like rejection machine, because there are a lot of applicants per job. But I'm not saying that to put people off, because the good quality applications will still get through and they will get jobs. And actually, the further you get through the process, obviously you'll be able to see some progress that you get into interview or assessment centre or whatever. But you're also more likely to get feedback from an employer the further that you get through. If you fail at, you know, that very first stage, the feedback that you like to get is probably going to be quite generic, if they give you any feedback at all. But if you get through to an interview or an application, an assessment centre, they will give you the feedback, but you've usually got to ask for it. Now, the point where you've just been rejected for what might be your dream job is probably not the time that you're feeling like you want to ask why you were so rubbish that you didn't get the job. But I think you have to, because otherwise, how are you going to learn from that? And actually, to get through to assessment centre or interview, you've shown them some really good stuff. So you are a good quality candidate, but you need to know what it is that you need to work upon. And then it might be that you reapply to the same employer next year or whenever they've got another vacancy, and you can show them that you've worked on that. You know, when I was at John Lewis, I used to sometimes say it was a bit like the X Factor, because every year we'd have the candidates that would come back that had been the year before, but they'd been working on whatever feedback we'd given them, and they were better, and we did often give them the jobs. So you do need to ask for the feedback so that you know what it is that you need to work on. Sometimes it's just the case of, you know, we only had 2 roles and you were the 3rd best, but you know, it's unlucky or whatever. But you know, sometimes there's other things, like, you know, you were in a group activity and you didn't speak, but you were great in the presentation or the interview or whatever. So you've got to ask for the feedback, you've got to keep going, you've got to pick yourself up. And it's hard, because if you've been unsuccessful or something, your confidence can often be sort of on the floor, but you've got to just keep at it, because you're not just going to be given the job. You've got to keep applying, and you've got to be persistent. And, you know, think about the things that keep you motivated, that give you a bit of a lift. You know, I'm sure I've told you this before, Lisa, but I've got a group of friends who, if I'm having a rough time in business or a great time, they're the friends that I go and speak to, and I'll celebrate with them when things go well. But when things have been a bit tough, they'll lift me up as well. And I think you can apply that to things with job hunting and with your career, in that your friends will help you and give you a bit of a boost and give you that motivation to keep going. So hang around with the people that make you feel good and lift you up.
Yeah, and that's so important in life in general, isn't it?
Oh God, yeah.
It's interesting, the comparison to the X Factor. I've just been watching the Stephen Bartlett interview with Liam Payne, and he talks about the fact that he was the kid who was rejected on a mass scale from X Factor, and he was also the kid who's now made it huge and big, and you know, he was a young lad at the time, and the effect that both of those things had on his life and where he's got to. But the fact that he had to go back, you know, he wanted it so much, he took the knock, and he took it pretty hard, but he kept going and he kept working on what he needed to improve, and he went back and he turned into the guy who made it. So, and
he's such a great example of someone that takes opportunities and seeks opportunities out. I got introduced to Katie Leeson, who now is MD at Social Chain, which is the company that Stephen Bartlett founded. And it was Stephen that introduced me to Katie, because I'd done a shout out on LinkedIn for people to interview for my 2nd book, and he had recommended her, and I didn't know her until that point. Now I see her everywhere, but at that point I didn't know her, and so he's always got his eye on sort of matching things up and seeking out opportunities, and I think that's a real strength.
Yeah, absolutely. And super exclusive, because you don't even know this, Sophie, but Katie Leeson is actually going to be the last surprise guest on this webinar series.
Oh, amazing. Oh, she's great fun. Yeah, that'd be brilliant.
Okay, so just starting to wrap up our questions now before we open the floor. We have there's constantly a big debate, and I guess a frustration, I think, in some of the graduate market, in terms of employers, maybe not the big businesses, but the smaller businesses who continuously ask for experience in their job roles. Mm-hmm. And it's a real chicken and egg situation, because if you're a recent grad, as you said earlier, you know, you shouldn't be expected to have that much experience. It should be about the, you know, the softer skills. But, you know, there are still job roles going out there for grads that are requesting experience. What's your take on that? And should it, if a job role states that you need experience, should a candidate still go for it if they've got none, and absolutely just try and wow them, or steer clear of those? Or
I think, well, there's a few things within that, isn't there? So if it's a graduate job and they're asking for experience, that's not helpful, really, is it? For the reasons that we've already discussed around the fact that you're unlikely to have a huge amount of experience, or certainly a huge amount of relevant experience. So I would kind of be a bit wary of those kind of jobs, if I'm honest, because if they're asking for experience, you know, is it definitely a role that they feel is suitable for graduates? there'll be some clues there around the type of experience and the level of detail that they give about that experience. And if it's not clear, maybe you just give them a ring and ask them, and what do you mean by experience? Like, because you used to often see 5 years experience or 10 years experience, and the employers aren't allowed to do that anymore. So you shouldn't see that because it's age discrimination. So you shouldn't be able to see that anymore. But if they're saying experience and they're not telling me what that is, then maybe it's worth just exploring it in the first place. Because if it is that they are expecting someone significantly more experienced, actually don't waste your time going for it, because you're not even going to get shortlisted. But yeah, check that out first of all. There'll be some clues, if the salary is advertised for the role, if the salary is quite high and higher than you would expect for a graduate role, then that's probably a clue again that you're not going to get it, get anywhere with it. But experience can come in different forms, and it might be that you've had experience working in a bar or working in a shop or something that you might not think, oh, well, that doesn't really go with marketing. But actually what it would give you is working under pressure, communication skills, dealing with customer complaints, things like that. That would, you'd have some great examples of conflict and all sorts of different things. So think about what you can move across that's transferable. But in terms of whether you should still apply, if you've gone through those bits or you feel like there's a bit of a chance, I think go for it. There's loads of things out there that say that women in particular don't go for jobs if they don't meet all of the criteria. So I think there was some research that came out where it said if men meet sort of 60% of the criteria, they'll apply, whereas women feel like they need to tick every single box. And I'm sure that's not the same for all men and for all women, but you've got to just go for things. If you don't apply for it, you've got no blooming chance of getting it. But equally, going back to my point around putting in quality applications, if you haven't got a decent chance of at least getting through to the next stage, you don't want to spend hours and hours, which is what it would be if you're putting through a quality application. And the alternative is you just fire off your CV without any real thought to it. Well, that's not going to get you anywhere either. So I think explore, make sure you've got the information that you can get so that you know whether you've got a chance, and then give it a try if you think it's worth it.
Yeah, really good advice. Excellent. Okie dokie. So I'm going to start to answer some questions from our lovely group here, which they're starting to come in. So if you've got a question that you're waiting to ask, pop it in the Q&A now. I'm just going to work through them. So I'm going to start by this first question, which is probably a pretty tough one, but we've got somebody asking, how do you practice for online tests? Are there any tips or resources or? Yeah,
so that's not actually that tough, because with online tests, I might be getting a bit too technical with it, but they're either done by a huge supplier or they're bespoke to an organisation and still created by a supplier. The big suppliers for tests are a company called SHL, who are the main, actually they might be called something else now, I might have to follow up if you do know anything to send out. They keep changing their name. It's either SHL or Gartner, one or the other, and I forget what they are at the moment, but they are, like, for example, one of the biggest test providers. So anyone that's got a generic test, it's probably one of theirs, and they have a practice website, a tab on their website with practice tests. So if you know what kind of tests there are, then you can have a go on their test page and try them out. So typical tests that you're going to get are going to be things like a numerical test, a verbal reasoning test, maybe a situational judgment test. And they are super frustrating tests because numerical and verbal reasoning in particular, not usually that relevant to the role if it's an off-the-shelf sort of generic test, but employers are using them just to cut down the volume to get them through to the next stage. So you can definitely go and practice them, go and have a look at that website. Another thing is, if you can still access your careers service, they probably have a supply of practice tests with either SHL or with one of the other big test providers. So they'll be able to help you with that as well. So you can practice. And the things that the tests are looking for, they're looking for accuracy. So they want you to get the right answers, but they're also looking for speed. So you can't only get all of the ones that you do right, but you've only done 2 out of 20 in the time that you've got. You need to get that balance between the two. And then the other kind of tests that you get are personality questions, which are around sort of how you like to work and your sort of way, your sort of personality style, I guess. And with that, there's no, well, in theory, there's no right or wrong answers, although they're obviously looking for certain skills and qualities that come through from that. You can't really practice those because it should be just a gut. But yeah, definitely have a bit of a practice, because you'll get one chance to do those in the live environment. So you don't want to blow it on the test. There's nothing worse than going out on the test. Worst stage.
Good to know that you can do some good practice around those. Okay, next question. So, as someone hoping to start studying marketing at university soon, what key skills or tools would you recommend learning, and how would you recommend doing that?
Well, if you're studying marketing at uni soon, then you're going to be equipped with the technical skills through the course. So there'll be a lot of stuff sort of to do with marketing and with developing your knowledge once you're actually on the course. So I would probably be thinking about some of those other skills that sit alongside that. So I mentioned, great communication skills, creativity, commercial awareness, those sorts of things. And I think what you could be doing while you're at uni is, one, you could get a part-time job if you haven't already got one, where you'll definitely be able to develop those skills. But another thing that I would definitely recommend looking to do when you start uni is to join clubs and societies. I always found them a bit awkward when I was quite shy when I was in first year, but they're a great opportunity to make friends, but also a great opportunity to get things for your CV further down the line. And you can get positions of responsibility within certain societies and clubs as you sort of progress through those, and that will be super useful when you come to apply for jobs, because not everyone is going to be sort of head of marketing for a society or whatever. So look for those opportunities to get involved.
Yeah, and as an employer, from my perspective there, of somebody who employs marketing skills into my business, what we look for is people who are doing above and beyond. So HubSpot and Google are great for free courses where you can be learning additional skills and getting really, insular on one particular skill set there. Nearly all of them are free, so you can go online and be doing that in spare time. Check out Fabric Academy, which is obviously who we're hosting this with, but there's a ton of resources on that website, all free of charge, which help you develop skills in certain specialisms in marketing. So what I look for in a grad who's looking for a marketing role is that they haven't just done their university degree, that they've been out doing their own additional learning, and it can be free learning, it doesn't have to be paid for or certificated even, but that they're out showing that they're willing to do above and beyond to look for taking themselves to the next level. Okay, next question from Jessica. So I love the idea of the creative CV, but do you feel like it favors those that can afford to put money into it?
Ooh. I mean, most of the ideas I've seen haven't really cost any real money. So I've seen people that have baked cakes and put logos and things on, but they've made them themselves. So there'd be a bit of a cost there around some ingredients, but nothing else. I've seen people that have traveled to a head office to sort of sit there and present something to someone. You'd have a bit of a cost for that if you had to go down to London, for example. But I think the whole point for me of being creative is coming up with something that is no or low cost. And I'm not a creative person, so it's hard for me to kind of think of examples that I would come up with. But I can't think of anything that has cost mega bucks. It tends to be that people are mocking up products or something like that. But I think you could spend money on that, but you could also, not. And if you're not the kind of person that can make those sorts of things, but you've got the concept for the idea, then your skill really is going to be to go and find someone that has got that sort of creative skill that can put something together for you with your direction to meet the brief of whatever it is that you've come up with.
Yeah, great. Okay, so question now from Jasmine. So I'm currently on a placement year and have been motivated in the last couple of years to work in the fitness industry within marketing. Is there any advice you would give for getting a grad job in the fitness industry, as I know it's exceptionally competitive?
Gosh, that's very niche. I mean, I think, great that you were able to be that specific, because That's going to really narrow your search and your focus, which I think is great, because you're not going to waste time going for things that you're not interested in. It's not really an area that I know a huge amount about, but I guess with this and with anything where it is very niche, I would probably be trying to look for people that work within that area. I'd probably be trying to look for people that have the kind of job that you want to go into, and I would be approaching them and seeing if they would be prepared to have, you know, a virtual coffee with you, so that you can pick their brains and find out, you know, how did they get to that point? What was their journey? What was their advice? Can they introduce you to anyone that would be useful? And that's probably the approach that I would take. You know, you won't get everyone responding to you, so you might have to reach out to a few people. But you, again, an example of just being, you know, persevering, being very polite, not being hugely demanding, because they'll probably get approached by people for various other things. But I think that would probably be the route that I would take, would be to find some people in that industry and tap them up for a bit of advice and guidance.
Yeah, and LinkedIn's perfect for that, right? We can, you know, you can hunt people down from LinkedIn and find really specialist niche roles, and just, you know, be brave to send them a message, just cold, and explain what you're looking for. And people are really, really willing to.
It's so hard. I do that all the time. You know, I do that all the time with stuff. And again, I've told you this before, but you know, when I was writing the second book, there were a load of women that I approached to be in that, who were quite high profile, you know, that people would know of, and you know, they all replied, and not all of them could do it, but they all replied. And you know, some of the women that are super busy, I might have only got half an hour or 40 minutes with them, but they did it. And so if you can be compelling, and this goes back to great communication skills, I guess, you know, what's your pitch to them, what's in it for them, how can you make your LinkedIn message more compelling than, you know, the others that they might have received. But again, you've got to go for it. You've got to go for it. Shy Ben's getting out. That's what they say, isn't it? You've got to go for it.
So hopefully that helps, Jasmine. Get on LinkedIn this afternoon.
Definitely.
Okay, question from James here. So what is the difference between a good LinkedIn user and a great LinkedIn user in your experience?
Oh, that's a good question. So on LinkedIn, if you go into your LinkedIn profile, it will tell you what level of profile yours is. So mine, if you want to connect with me, mine's classed as an all-star profile, which is the best rating that LinkedIn will give you. And all that means is that I've literally filled out every single section. A lot of people I see haven't filled out every section, even like really experienced people where I'm like, wow, why have you not filled these sections out? It doesn't take, well, maybe it does take a bit of time initially. I think the key thing is to make sure you filled out every single section, and have a look at mine if you need to see all the sections, because like I say, mine is full. But also it's keeping on top of that. So every couple of months I'll go in and I'll just update various things just to make sure it is completely current. It's making use of the things that are on there, you know, have a decent profile picture that's reasonably professional and that is clear. Use the banner, make sure you've got something on the banner. It's going on it and using it. Don't be a lurker and just sort of spy on what people are up to. Contribute, like things, comment on things, share things. You know, when you're not used to LinkedIn, it can be a bit weird to just put yourself out there, but you've got to try a few different things out. People love good news stories. You know, if I post about like an award win or like some sort of good news, people love it. But you've got to just, you know, just keep just plugging away with it, and have a look at things like the analytics on your posts. So I've noticed that if I share someone else's content, the analytics are poor in that I only get a few hundred views on something that I've shared. So I now like or comment on people's posts rather than share them, because I think that I've got an audience of say 8,000 people on my LinkedIn, and I think that there's more visibility from them when I comment rather than share. But you know, some of the posts that I've done have had 30, 40,000 views on them. And I just kind of take a bit of a note of that as to what was it that people like about that. Is it that I've tagged someone in that's got a big audience? Is it the photo? You know, there's all sorts of things, but you've got to be consistent with LinkedIn. Someone that has a really great contact at LinkedIn told me that the optimum amount of times to post on LinkedIn is 2 to 3 times a week. So to try and space it out and just do 2 or 3 posts a week. So by doing that, you've got your consistency, but apparently the algorithms like that amount of posting. So you're not spamming with stuff all the time, you're spreading it out. And when I follow that, I do find that I get more engagement on it. But another thing you can do is you can follow companies that you're interested in, follow people that you're interested in. There's all sorts of things that you can do with LinkedIn. You've just got to get a bit more confident with using it and keep doing it.
Yeah, and that's actually a part of that was really useful in terms of marketing specialisms, of using the data to give you knowledge and insights into how to better something. So we use this right across the marketing specialism, but actually looking at what's performing, what isn't performing, what's doing well, what isn't, good times of day to post, like you just mentioned there, how many times a week, using that information as opposed to just scattergun posting and hoping for the best, to get really clever about how you post, when you post, and what sort of stuff. So that's great advice there in terms of just getting brave and putting yourself out there. It does take a little bit of bravery, and sometimes you feel like you're really kind of exposing yourself to a group of strangers, but the more you do it, the more you get comfortable.
And it's the best platform to do that on, because it's rare that you would get a rude comment or something nasty on LinkedIn. It is pretty professional, so if anything, you'll just get no interaction if it doesn't hit the mark. But if that's the worst,
yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, so question from a bookie now. Often struggle to know what to post on LinkedIn and make sure I get the right balance of professional and personal. Do you have any tips for this, for finding the right content?
Yes, I think we've covered that a little bit, but I think it's good. You need to be mostly professional on LinkedIn. It is the most professional of the social media platforms for sure. But I think there's nothing wrong in having the odd personal thing. From time to time, I'll post something relating to my daughter. It's usually in a work context. I'm a single parent, so I talk about that quite a bit and how I include her in things. And people like that because it shows a person, a human behind things. There's been stuff I've posted about sort of work-life balance before, or about sleep habits and things. So again, there's a bit of a professional link, but it's something that's personal to me. I have a look at the people that you follow. Pay a bit more attention to what content they're posting. Who are the ones that you like to see in your news feed? What are they posting that you like? What balance have they got between things? And again, it's just sort of trying it out. But I think you want mostly professional with a little bit of personal that shows a bit of personality.
Yeah. And remember, I guess what we were talking about before there as well, that your employers are likely to go to LinkedIn and have a good look at that profile. So just make sure any personal stuff on there is things that you would want out there in a professional capacity as well as a personal as well. Right, time for one last question and then we're going to wrap up. So let's have this one. Is it worth applying to a grad role that requests a specific degree if you didn't study that subject?
If it's saying that that's essential, then probably not, but I'd probably be digging a bit further into why they've asked that. So, if it's something like law, you need to have at least done the conversion. If it's accountancy, then you're going to have a relevant degree. If it's medicine, we definitely want you to have the right degree for that. So there are some where it's very obvious. For others, I think most are usually, they might have a preference for certain degrees, but usually they're not actually that bothered because it's more about you as a person and what you bring to the role. So I would probably ask a bit more about that. Is it listed as essential? If it is, and you can't see an obvious reason as to why, just get in touch. You don't have to be rude and question their judgment for putting that, but you could just get in touch and ask a bit more about that. And is it essential because you're really interested because of X, Y, and Z, and kind of get that across and see what they say.
Yeah, amazing. Honestly, Sophie, thank you so much. That has been so useful.
It's been fun.
Great advice. We've got a couple of questions that are still in the Q&A that we have run out of time for. So if you haven't had your question answered, give us a follow on the Fabric Academy socials, or Sophie, I'm sure you won't mind me saying, give you a follow on your personal socials, and fire any questions over to us. We'd be happy on the Fabric side to answer anything that we haven't answered already. If you've enjoyed the webinar, please share this far and wide with anybody that you know that you think might benefit from it. We know the grad market is so tough right now, so any support and advice that we can share with people, brilliant. We're going to send a link of this recording to everybody who's on here, so if you're a little bit further down the line and you're applying for a role and you just want a refresher of this advice, you'll have it there to go back to, but you can also share that link as well. And don't forget to register for the next webinar, where we've got the awesome Joe Glover from the Marketing Meetup, a great community to be part of, by the way, if you're thinking about going into marketing. I know we answered a question on that earlier, but check these guys out. And Sophie Miller of Pretty Little Marketing, and that's all about building an engaged community. These guys have collectively got a community of 80,000, so it's definitely a good one to be involved in. And thank you again to Sophie, you've been absolutely amazing. Check out her books, both on Amazon, both bestsellers now, so yeah, check them both out, but some amazing content in there in terms of just getting career ready. And yeah, have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care.